All right, happy Thursday. Glad to see everybody's here. So what we're doing, so instead of office hours for refinement, we're going to continue, as we mentioned yesterday and the working session for SAST to complete, we're going to continue with deck scoring. What we are left with is one more section that is of work that we could not get to before people's brains melted. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to continue with the same kind of activity that we did yesterday. I have already gone through the worksheet in an attempt to clean it up so that it is not a weird mismatch of requirements and also jobs to be done. And I have also gone through and put in straw man arguments for, is it defined, how much effort is there, and what's the complexity. So let's get to it. All right, we're going to improve the product. That's where we left off. So mono repo support. Two items to be done. Number one, there's a subset of analyzers, which, and I don't think we've done, I don't think we've looked at all of them with this lens of some of them look for one project and one project only, and that's all they scan. Versus some of them go through everything that is in the Docker file, the file system, and will scan everything that matches according to the scanner's detection rules. We need the ability for all of our analyzers to scan everything that is within a particular project, regardless of where it happens to be. So we need to figure out which analyzers need to be updated, and then we need to provide the update itself. And so those are, to me, those are the two jobs to be done to better support mono repos. And you can see the sizing that I've put forward for defined effort complexity.
I think that might be a small complexity as well. Okay. I'm trying to decide what would make the difference between small and medium for an audit.
Okay. I heard you. Okay. I heard you say, I didn't hear you quibble with effort because there's just a number of them we got to go through. But.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that looks correct to me. I would say, though, having looked and done a little bit of this, I do think that it's some of the effort, it's variable too, with like regard to how deep you are in that language or stack as well. To be able to like quickly see, does it do more than one or not? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding this. Like, for example, like Elixir is pretty straightforward. It's like an umbrella apps, but like I knew that because I've done a lot of Elixir, but I'm not as deep in Java or Kotlin or some of the others. So it's like, there's quite a bit of digging to do to like figure out, is this a common pattern or not? So there could probably be some efficiency here with folks picking up the languages or stacks that they're most comfortable with or most knowledge first, and then, you know, I don't know if that is anything to consider or not.
If it were me, this is me putting my engineer hat on as opposed to a manager hat, the way that I'd be tempted to address an investigation would be to mush every single integration test we have together into one repository and make multiple copies of every single one of those projects in sibling directories, and then run those against every single analyzer we have to see if it caught every single project that it was supposed to catch.
It's funny. I made a joke in the chat about a project that we have that essentially used to be that we don't use anymore.
Yeah.
But one kind of interesting distinction that I think that we haven't quite addressed on this is the difference between a mono repo as a combination of different languages and a mono repo as a combination of projects in the same language. So Like you can obviously run it against the main Rails app right now, and that's going to run a JavaScript analysis and a Ruby analysis, and that's a mono repo. But that's not really what we're talking about here. What we're specifically talking about is multiple occurrences of projects in the same language.
Yeah, I totally misread this for what it's worth. That's a good call out. Also, like your example of like mashing them all together should probably work. It's more so having it multiple times, right? I think the common pattern I've seen is like having like the front end next to the back end when you have like a SPA or, you know, a single page application for the front end, or, and then maybe like multiple, you know, AWS Lambda functions, which would be multiple, you know, Python projects. And sometimes you have like a shared library, you know, so there are different ways, I think, in the, it's very bespoke and, you know, unique to each project. So I think it's at least having a minimum of, you know, two of the same type of language that the analyzer or should be scanning, you know? So like, does it find both Rails apps? I mean, that's pretty gigantic and maybe absurd, but yeah. Okay, so this is a lot simpler than I thought it was. SMS makes sense to me.
What about the update task? And I know the scope of that is going to be determined based off of the audit.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to argue with myself while y'all are thinking.
Yeah, I think MMM makes some sense in this. You know, it's not super, there's open questions about whether this happens in a, you know, a different way for each analyzer, or if we're able to abstract into like a common pattern. So I have some questions there, so it makes sense in the definition. Effort and complexity, again, depending on whether you're, you know, doing a generic solution for all or you're touching each one, you know, it's not a light task in terms of effort or complexity.
And I will go ahead and call out, I do not declare a ownership over the notes column. So if you have some that you want to make sure are recorded or record in advance of what's getting there, please contribute. All right, I'm moving on. Mechanism for vulnerability research to improve rules. These are existing scanners. So this is separate and so this is as a reminder from a couple of days ago. The idea here is not the action of improving the rules themselves, however, providing a way for vulnerability research, or maybe the community, to contribute an improved rule set for each one of our scanners, and that can be anything from improving the false positive ratio, or it can be new rules or what have you. It's an override of the rule pack that comes shipped with these open source scanners and rule sets that we're using.
I guess this depends on. Good, Russ.
Go ahead, Lucas. I was going to ask if these rules are going to be like publicly available, open source, or not.
Does this task include the writing of, say, a DSL or something, or was that in another spot? Well, I guess there's generic scanners down below.
What's the DSL?
Domain-specific language.
Yeah, domain-specific language. So, like,
yeah.
how is an injected rule defined? Like, and you've got to think through the different flexibility aspects of, like, so.
Yeah, and I think that the wording between 70 and 79 too is a bit inconsistent. So I think you covered this, Thomas, but injecting rules versus improving existing rules, are both of those in scope here, or is just one?
I think that's a fair point, and I think that's probably something we should call out here. I think both cases are valid, and we will see examples of both of them. And I think this actually goes to answering that question of what would be publicly available versus what would be not. I think, you know, if we're improving an existing rule, I think there's a very easy case to say we should just contribute back to the open source project. In terms of net new rules, there are certainly things that the community will create. And I imagine if we do this right, there would be a repository somewhere where people contribute rules. And then there certainly will be things that we will do that will be part of GitLab's secret sauce. When you look at all of our competitors, every single one of them is doing some form of this where they have their layer of intelligence on top of whatever scanners they're using. We will certainly do that as well. And this is one where I would encourage us to look at the longer time frame. While we may start with things as sort of like secret sauce for GitLab, I think in the long term of things, we will always continue to move those things down to core.
Okay, I think that makes sense. So I guess I would say that the generic scanners, the next item in my mind would be the way that we would inject new rules. Is this not the way that others have been thinking about that?
That's also how I've largely been thinking about that.
I'm going to follow my question in my head. Sorry, I spoke over somebody.
Sorry. Okay, so
Go for it.
yeah, I'm just a little bit lost here. So we are using a wrapper around third-party linter or suppose Brakeman or other linter, right? So what are we doing here? Like, what do you mean by injecting rules here? We are just using the third-party tools, the vulnerability research. I mean, what direction are we going for this? I'm just trying to understand. Can anyone explain a little bit?
I'll try and let others amend to it. For me specifically, the open source scanners that we're using right now, we're using them for two purposes. One, what is the engine used for detection of vulnerability findings in the projects which they can scan? And secondly is the rule definitions that they are using as a part of that detection engine itself. Okay. The idea behind this, at least to me, is a decoupling of those concerns so that the mechanism, which is the capability, is separate from the data, which are the rules themselves. And so when we're talking about injecting rules into an analyzer, we're talking about amending the capabilities of the underlying scanner itself so it can either detect new things or it has a different way of detecting what it can already detect itself.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Now I'm going to follow my instincts, or at least my questions, and I'm going to risk scrolling up. So injecting new rules into a scanner. How is this tied to a generic scanner if we have a need or a feature that is calling for enabling customers to create custom rules?
Oh, I see. So this is like Open Ioc, right? Similar to Open Ioc custom rules.
Can you describe Open Ioc for those unfamiliar?
Open Ioc is a open source framework for IOC means indicator of compromise. So you can define a vulnerability or compromise by yourself by writing some rules in a XML format. That is Open Ioc actually called. So usually we use like Open Ioc used for detecting a malware in an endpoint, but in this case, I don't know what we are talking about static analysis of code. So that is a different thing. Yeah, just over my head. It comes over my head. That's why I just talked about that.
Yeah, and I guess without getting too deep into solutioning here, I'm not sure what ground we want to cover here, because yeah, it's a discovery issue, so we'll have to figure out exactly how we plan on doing this. I think that the idea is fairly well defined, but there are still open questions. So I guess I'd still say medium for this.
Yeah. Okay.
Effort and complexity is probably large.
Yep. Makes sense. Yeah.
I'm going to keep going. All right. Generic scanner or scanners. Let me change that. Okay. When we were talking about this on Tuesday, we mentioned that there's two ways to do it. As I was jokingly referred to, the right way and the easy way. So one is the creation of a brand new AST based scanner, which is something that is currently under research. The other is a massive regex engine. So those were the two ideas that have been put forward as a way to approach this. The other two tasks within this that I think is common, regardless of which way or which ways we go with this. One, we got to get this detection logic exposed into a CI so it's kicked off, and we're going to need integration projects to prove that it works. So, and strawman arguments for definition, effort, and complexity are here.
Let me add a note to the regex engine that's going to have some pretty severe limitations, like in terms of like quality as well as maintenance. And once you get to a certain size with regex, it tends to be really hard to understand and not regress in terms of other bugs, etc.
Well,
like you want to, like add like a new regex or like approach a new problem, and then depending upon how it's written, I guess you had multiple regexes, but
yeah, I mean, I was thinking this like a customer would supply a list of regexes and names for those rules. So we're really just providing a generic platform engine. They supply a rule set, or a vulnerability researcher supply a rule set to the engine.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So we can assume that the customers are enough skillful to write regex in this case, right?
Is that we provide them a platform to write it.
Oh,
whether or not they're capable of doing so, they can hire people to.
Okay, I see. That makes sense. Right.
This could have the limitation too of size and performance as well as I think it's possible to write vulnerable regexes as well.
Yeah.
Maybe that's only what. Yeah, there's some security aspects of this too, if I recall.
Yeah.
Servers and whatnot.
Yeah, I agree with Daniel. So if you write a bad regex, then it may be very slow. Like you need to know whether it will perform better, the regex that you write.
I'll quote the old joke that is really falsely attributed to, like, congratulations, you're using regex. Now you have two problems. But yeah. Okay. All right. There is an issue for the AST-based scanner that has been going on for a little while that vulnerability research has been using. I don't have it off the tip of at the tip of my fingers, but I know that one does exist. On bling, ongoing. Go for it.
I guess I have several questions about the regex option. Like, how seriously are we considering that? It's kind of unclear to me. Is vulnerability research going to potentially, would vulnerability research potentially write some of those regex to detect things that they found? And if we went this route, would we be shipping with like close to an empty rule set of things that we're going to be able to detect, since we're talking about having the customers write them themselves?
Okay, so I'm going to try to unpack some of these things. I'm going to keep it short because we could talk about this for hours. So no, largely, I don't want to go the regex route for all of the reasons that have already been mentioned. Can anyone really write regexes? No. Largely, this is looking at doing this the right way. I think this is an area of research. And in fact, like, this is largely what GitLab or GitHub was talking about yesterday with their CodeQL language. This is one where we need to have a framework to do this, because this is how we take our scanners from open source tools into something that is actually very valuable and very powerful. We have to come up with a way to expose the ability to take in security telemetry data that is what basically vulnerability and research teams are focused on. We certainly have a few of those folks here today in a small team. You could imagine us partnering with larger organizations like, I don't know, I'm going to make this up, the Cisco Talos group. Microsoft itself is known for having a very robust security research group. So creating a way for us to then have those partnerships with research groups like that so that they can directly influence and impact our scanners. And when you take their research and our reach by having control and access to a lot of code sitting in repositories, that together becomes a very large net positive interest. Whereas this is why no one like individually can do this. And this is why GitHub and GitLab are very well suited to play in this space, because we can provide those entry points for researchers to have very real and material impact on the security of code running in the world.
I think that makes clear some stuff up for me. Thanks.
Yeah, as Taylor mentioned, like Cisco Talos group actually write a lot of Open Ioc for detecting malware, and anyone can contribute to that. That is why I just mentioned, is it similar to Open Ioc work here? Thanks.
Okay, then refocusing this a little bit. So if we were to do an AST-based scanner, this would be presuming that one is identified. And therefore, this becomes a new scanner that we would be integrating. Not that we would go, I mean, and so if we were to refocus what this to the scope that we would have, and I'm a default for this a bit, we would be integrating a new scanner, whether it is a regex engine or it is an AST-based engine, or both. What are we talking about here from a side-defined effort and complexity standpoint?
So I wonder if we want to, maybe this is part of 80 actually, but I think a prerequisite to this would be defining either a common query language or inputs to that. If we find an out-of-the-box AST-based scanner, then maybe that gives us one, but we probably still need some kind of interchange format. So I'd be fine with leaving that level of complexity to 80, and assuming that we have one, we can weight these appropriately. But I don't know if that's the approach that others want to take.
I'm totally on board with that. That makes sense to me.
Okay. Hopefully I captured the thought adequately. Okay. Unless there's
In
more.
that case,
Yeah.
I would say the engineering effort for an AST would actually be pretty small if we just found one. I don't think we will, so we're either going to have to build it or build a regex one at the moment. I almost feel like we should weight that differently depending on the outcome of whether there is one or whether we're going to build this.
Okay. Then how about this? Largely undefined. There's too many gaps to know exactly what we're going to do here.
Yeah, that looks good to me.
Okay, I'm seeing nods, yes. All right, 85 and 86, exposed detection logic in CI and also creating integration projects. And I did not look up to see where how these mapped to what we said before. Up that.
Those look right.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks good.
All right, benchmark projects. Now, these are not the creation of benchmarks projects. These are the integration, so they're part of our build process. So if we're going to release a new version, how's it tracking against our benchmarks? Are we improving, or are we staying the same, or are we getting worse? And in my head, this is analogous to us integrating integration tests as a part of our build process as well.
I think the defined would be small for me as well because we already do this with the SAST and spot bugs.
Okay.
It's a predetermined process.
Small effort and complexity as well. Okay. I'm going to come back to the telemetry block because we'll think we're going to spend the most time there because there's a lot there that we captured. I'm skipping down to 102 for all analyzers report severity. So refresher for everyone from Tuesday. So we have a delightful mix of different types of tools that are available to us within our analyzers, some of which to tell us the severity of the findings that we have, some of which don't. And so that's how we get a mix of some projects and with the languages they're in, we get unknown severities versus others, we get a very crisp definition. So the ask of this is that we provided to make it more uniform. So that it's so that regardless of what language or framework or that we happen to be trying to scan, we're going to get the benefit of a very opinionated definition of how severe that finding is, small, medium, whether that is a low, medium, high, or critical severity, and therefore we're no longer reporting unknowns.
So is this, the idea here is to update the analyzer to have like a map or, you know, like this data file that would like say, okay, this one is this severity, etc.
Yes.
Has there been any talk about actually engaging with the upstream scanners? Be interesting to actually get back to the community to provide this to them. And then it would just be exposing it, right?
I have not brokered that idea. I didn't even think of it, and I'll be honest, the reason I didn't think of it is that some of the tooling we're used for security scans are more appropriately classified as linters and code quality tools, where that
Right.
has a security pack on top of it. So
yeah, and some of them don't expose certain aspects. They can't because of they're a plugin for ESLint, I think, for example, or the TSLint.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it'd be cool if in the cases where we could, it'd be nice to give up. But it sounds like, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense, though.
Yeah.
That limitation.
Yeah, where we could. Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of where we could, in the case of some even linters, they do have CVEs or CVSSs attached to them through some kind of metadata. So if there's any kind of extra linking to external identifiers, then we can look upstream for those.
I want to add one additional thing that that Matt's group, which is interacting with vulnerabilities, vulnerability management. Thank you. I walked through that in my head. Vulnerability management is working through is a concept of basically severity is a helpful thing to have. There are scoring mechanisms for that exist like CVSS. However, the problem is organizations have different opinions about how important things are or not. So it's one thing to have the metadata about that, like what kind of rule or what kind of severity or type of exploit or anything that you would use to sort of determine how risky something is things that we should absolutely be collecting and getting scanners to put and pass through to our scanner reports. On the other side of that is, cool, we found a vulnerability. We have the metadata associated with it, which is severity, if it's OWASP top 10, certain classes of vulnerabilities, et cetera. And then vulnerability management wants to go and create basically like a scoring system where an organization can set their different settings and risk tolerances and all of that and get a magic sort of score of how risky it is for an organization. So I sort of separate these two things. There's we just need the raw metadata, which I agree. Scanners, if we can get them to provide it, that's great. If we need to layer on top of it, let's do that. But getting more and richer detail into the metadata around vulnerabilities so that then we can build tooling to allow people to create their own scoring based on that metadata. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes perfect sense.
So Taylor, are you talking about like scoring in numbers instead of like low, medium, critical, right? Scoring in numbers like 80 out of 100, something like that?
That is an idea that the vulnerability management team's considering. They're also looking at letter grades, like there are all sorts of grading type of risk that they can do. What this is really focused about from our perspective is let's make sure that we have consistent and rich metadata associated with findings that come from our tools.
We could recurse. We could dex score what it would be to dex score the vulnerabilities. Sorry, couldn't help myself.
Detention. Any other discussion or notes or commentary on this block?
I think the only there is that open question of can we give back? Can we upstream, right? This is, I think, in terms of like just us overlaying this type of data. It seems like it's pretty well defined. If we were just to do it in the analyzer, as well as doesn't seem very complex. Or now the effort I think is probably medium in the sense that you gotta go. It's somewhat tedious. You just have to go through each analyzer, look at the different, look at all of the different things it's providing, then have someone who knows how to score appropriately to create the creation of those data files. The actually application of the data files is not so hard. But if someone was providing us the data files and we just said, here's what the structure needs to be, then this is probably a lot smaller of an effort.
Okay. I upped it to large as you were talking. Would you argue it down to medium?
It really depends upon if we're creating the data files or if we have someone who is going to create that. Does that make sense?
We've got the mechanism. This is us needing to get vulnerability research. If we do this, then we would need vulnerability research to sign up for keeping that up to date.
Yep, creating them and yep, exactly.
And so I have a meeting with David today. You know, because what I want to understand is the priority, right? So I can make sure to assign that priority to the vulnerability research team as well. It's kind of a side bit to this, right?
Yeah, Todd, I agree with that. And that's something that I need to help David articulate in terms of what is it that we need from a vuln research standpoint to make our scanners compete with some of our competitors from a quality standpoint. So yeah, totally agree. Happy to help out with prioritizing that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I might also increase the definition. There's a couple unanswered questions in the definition in terms of, are we looking for what level of granularity we're looking for here? Greater than high versus low, or do we need every qualitative level that CVSS like V3 provides? Because it's not just having severity and not having severity among our scanners. We don't know exactly how specific we can get.
So what are we amending or overriding our scanners with?
Yeah.
I think that does go to part of what this issue is that I don't think the answer is the same for all of the scanners. Some scanners we will have a much higher confidence in and others we won't. And trying to like decide what data do we need to supplement, what data do we want to trust, or what data do we want to completely override from our scanners.
Okay. I've added the question, what fields will we override or amend as a post-processing step? Okay. And then the other two steps here are obviously, so we've got a data file that we've made room for in each of these analyzers. Now we're going to have to do the act of actually doing the post-processing step. And then there's an integration test updates that need to be applied. And I see folks updating. Good. Thank you. We good? All right, I'm continuing on to split, build, and scan. So yes, there was a POC that was done on this for one of the, I don't remember if this was container or build or dependency scanning that where the POC was executed against, where we make building a separate concern from the act of scanning. And so step one of this to me was audit analyzers which care about building, let's figure out which ones we're building is actually part of the workload of the analyzer itself. And then, as we discussed on Tuesday, either we need to make building optional or provide a package rather than a container to inject the analyzer into an existing build workspace. So there were two options for proceeding forward, and it may not be the same for all of them, or at least as I'm thinking through it, it may not be the same solution for everything. So that's what we have.
There's one more piece to this in that, so there's compiling with some of them, there's fetching their depths in some of them, and then there's also injecting / fetching the scanner depth sometimes when we need, like, when it's using build output. Does that make sense? So, like, for example, security code scan, for example. And in those cases, we're also modifying their projects to add the depth. Yeah. I have a question with regards to this, and that is how sensitive are we to, let me see if I can phrase this. Some of my ideas around this basically push some upfront work to the user and their project and how they configure it. But how much work are we okay with requiring a user to do to set this up? You know, and is this going to be an optional path, or is this something where at some point down the road we'll deprecate ever building? So split, is that split as an optional thing, kind of like right now spot bugs, you can set a flag and it doesn't try to compile because you've already compiled? Is it an optional thing, or are we looking to actually stop building altogether, and this is the path towards that? What is needed for complete? Does that make sense?
I think it would be incremental, where the first step would be making the build step optional.
Mm-hmm.
The next step of whether or not we're completely removing the build step, I don't, at least in my opinion, we shouldn't do that because we want to favor convention over configuration, and that means things should work out of the box, which they do right now. So it would be a bit of a regression to remove that capability. But
Okay.
that's just like my opinion.
Yeah, so here's how I would think about this is the way it works today, where we do a best effort build, works for, let's say, 80% of cases. That is a magical experience that it just works. That already is better than a lot of our competitors who you have to zip up a built code or a compiled code and send it off to some service to go and do vulnerabilities. The problem is that there's the 20% that's really, really hard. And when you get into the enterprise, as I've mentioned, whatever monster a customer has assembled in terms of their build or their implementation of how they just work, maybe it's a mono repository, like whatever their unique monster is that they've got cobbled together, that's the part that we're never going to ever support every single possible thing that a customer does, whether it's a good practice or bad practice. So instead it's, okay, we're gonna have a great answer for 80% of people. And if you fall into that 20% where you've done something custom, we need a structured way for you to go and define a build for us to then go and scan, and have a way for our scanners to know, hey, don't try to build anything, use whatever the build step was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So cover the 80% case and then create an escape hatch of sorts for the 20% where they have a way to do it. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that also will still simplify a lot of what we're trying to do, because then we can just really focus on the simplest case, the most common case with our analyzers. And then just make sure that there is a way out easily if they have some, you know, special unicorn of a project. Got it.
Okay, since commentary has stopped, what's everybody think about the magic squares, the 9 squares here?
I think it's pretty well defined what we need to do to audit, right? We need to look for any scanner. Well, maybe it'll be a little bit harder to tease apart, but that might be small. What do you think? Other folks that are better informed on our analyzers? Lucas is giving a thumbs up for that to be a small. I think it's pretty well defined to audit. I think effort and complexity, yeah, are mediums probably.
Why would complexity be medium for this? I was leaning towards small.
Okay, so the effort is medium because we gotta look at them all. Complexity, I was thinking medium because you've they don't all work the same, so you have to like dig in deep and think about critically for each scanner we're wrapping how it works, and you've got to dig into how that language stack etc works too for each time when you're doing the audit. So that was why I was thinking, but if you think it's a small, I'm fine with that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And when in doubt, size up. So medium works for me.
What about making building optional?
Yeah, I think medium makes sense for the definition because the audit will inform how that's done. So there's likely some open questions. There's probably a couple different paths for that depending upon how it works. Like, do we get their build output? There's also the consideration for, so I'm going to use security code scan as an example. If we make it optional and they misconfigure their project, do we want to also create a tool to basically validate that they've configured things correctly? Or is it you've gone into the escape hatch, you're on your own now? So if they don't add the security code scan they build, it's not going to find anything, and it'll be potentially quite a few false negatives. But I think Lucas gave the thumbs up to on their own. Is that what I'm understanding, Lucas?
Yeah, but I don't know if that's the collective opinion.
Okay.
I agree with that. I think this is one where at some point you do get into territory where we don't know what you're doing with your monster you've created. I do think there is a particular thing we can do to help them along that journey, which is today it's really, really hard to know what has been scanned or not. And so, for example, I was on a call with a customer where they didn't believe that we were scanning things. And as it turned out, because of weird things that they were doing with POM files and other stuff that is truly over my head, our scanners were running, but it wasn't actually scanning dependencies. And so they didn't have a good sense. They knew that dependencies they were using had tons of vulnerabilities in them. And they were baffled when our scanners came back and said, no, looks good. And so like, we need a way to help tell them what has been scanned, which is something that we very easily could go and do. There's lots of options here. One thing that's in my head right now is this idea of like a code coverage type test of having a code coverage like visualization to help you understand what has been scanned or not, so that you know that like, hey, look at this build tree or this file tree and what was scanned, what was not scanned, what scanner ran where. So I think there are ways that we can help provide that information without getting into the weeds of what a customer is particularly doing.
Where is that feature in terms of us going to complete?
I mean, I definitely think that's more of a complete thing or a lovable type thing. Okay, I think cool. There might be very minimal ways for us to achieve that. But yeah, right now that's in the lovable category.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was gonna say because I don't see it on here. Right on. That would be a lovable thing, that's for sure. That's pretty cool.
I will admit to have gotten distracted. So we've got medium, small, large for making build optional, and for injecting, I got medium, large, large. Was there dissenting opinions?
I think potentially effort and complexity are swapped there because we got to touch all the things. So effort is high. Complexity is likely pretty low, but fine for others to bump that up if they think.
Or likely.
I'm cool with the complexity, but I might make the effort medium as well. Rather, it seems more like a car than a spaceship to me.
All right. Injecting an analyzer package.
So this would be like perhaps they would download our Go executable and run it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lucas, go for it.
So yeah, I guess, I mean, in some cases we might have to do cross compilation, so that is slightly higher complexity, but I think the definition's pretty straightforward. The effort would probably just be exposing an artifact during the build stage. And the complexity, it would probably be the highest. So I might say medium across the board.
Really?
Where does do you mean when you say artifactory, do you mean like we build and host the executables as a part of our analyzer deploy?
Yeah, like well,
Okay.
we could just release it as on the release page as an artifact, or we need to wait on the Go package MVC for Go proxy as part of the package stage, which I think is for 13.1 right now.
But yeah, so I think it's at least stems down there. I think it might be even a little bit easier in some ways because I think building and delivering. But yeah, I think there's some open questions too. So M is good for define because how are we going to do this with like a YAML file or like making it more automagic? Probably
All right. I'm going to poke at assumptions for a moment because I think I hear one. I hear this work for the normal case where GitLab.com is accessible from the instance doing the scan.
Oh, that's a great call out. I think in the offline mode, yeah, they would need some form of artifact or something. I mean, I guess they could, these are all open source. They could clone the repo locally. I don't know. What do you
I think it's the exact same thing that we do for offline security scans right now. It defaults to pulling images from GitLab.com in an offline environment. We say, download the image yourself and point at it.
Yeah.
So I don't see this being any different than the offline workflow we've come up with recently.
Yeah, honestly, they could even cache it in their images too, or however they're running their runners. They could pull it in beforehand.
I'm capturing the note. Documentation, at least for offline mode, needs to be updated to how do you utilize this minimally. And I'm looking for dissenting opinions.
No, that looks good to me. I think potentially even this might be more of an escape hatch anyways too. So it's like already pretty clear. It's like, oh, you just need this executable. Then they can do it in whatever bespoke offline environment they have. It's just something they got to put in their environment. But updating documentation, I think, is a good thing. Good call out.
So the reason that we didn't end up going this way in the first place for a lot of our tools is because we don't have self-contained analyzers. What our analyzers do is they wrap an underlying tool. So unless we're shipping a copy of ESLint with our ESLint analyzer, it's not going to be a single executable they're grabbing.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I forgot about that.
So we either need to, we looked into using something like Packer or GoBin data to like package an entire binary into the analyzer, which is a nightmare for a lot of reasons. So we either need to package all this together with a version copy of ESLint and a version copy of every library dependency or something else. So that's why it's got a fair bit more complexity there.
Yeah, I mean, now that you're bringing that up, I almost actually think this is larger than M's because we have to solve that problem.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Is that what I just heard?
Yeah, I think that the definition is at large because it's like, how are we going to do this? I don't know if both effort and complexity are also spaceships, but that's, I think, where it's like squishy. How are we going to go about doing that? What are we going to do with those depths? At first, I was like, oh, it's just a Go executable, but it's not that anymore. What is it? You know, how do you even do this? I mean, Debian packages will work for anytime that they're using Debian or some other package. Or what was that tool that Fabian was using to build the Debian packages, Lucas? Do you remember?
I don't.
It supports building a lot of different packages, though.
Yeah, so I would say that I would leave this as medium as there's a couple outstanding questions, namely like cross compilation, but I think most of the large effort is in effort and complexity.
Cool.
All right, one more thing to go over, telemetry. I put in just mediums across the board because we're talking about patterns we have that we are not utilizing consistently or well today. But these are the metrics that we articulated on Tuesday that we need to start emitting for telemetry about how we're performing within these scans.
Do we already have the first two in the database? Dismissed and remediated?
We have them within the GitLab database, but the question is, do we have them as telemetry that we can utilize? Excuse me. We have access to this today from GitLab.com. We do not have access to this from self-managed instances.
Oh, okay. Forgot about
We
this.
also do not expose it as telemetry from GitLab.com. It would require manually logging into a database and pulling it out.
Right, yeah. What is the end goal with telemetry? Where do we want these to be stored?
We want the ability to create Periscope dashboards, I think, but I heard Taylor. Okay, he gave thumbs up. Sorry.
That's what we want to go towards. I will say there is a whole lot of discussion to be had in this whole area. What we've got to get towards is there are a few pieces of key data, how people are interacting with our vulnerabilities, and then knowing how many vulnerabilities and what scanners they come from. If we were able to get access to that data and to that telemetry, we can make a lot smarter decisions around what languages we invest in, what scanners we invest in, and how we build features and functionality to make interacting with findings easier and more actionable. So that's like the high level what we're trying to accomplish here.
Do we know of other folks or other teams that have done that? Expose data from the Rails database into our Elasticsearch cluster or whatnot? Or are we doing any telemetry from on-premises GitLab instances into something Periscope can read?
So today we're pretty limited with it. I believe the only thing that we're really capturing is a few details about jobs and job names, and that's on .com. There is a large part of this is around the North Star metrics work that's being done. A number of groups in Secure have agreed that this approach is how we want to approach SAST, DAST, container scanning, and a few others. And so we are working with, I think, the enablement group to get these things set up so that they can be consumed properly through either Snowplow or what's the other one? Usage ping. And it's a matter of our team, SAST, DAST, container scanning, need to make sure that we're doing the work to actually fire those calls to Snowplow or to the usage ping.
Okay, so some other team will supply a function or something or a mechanism for us to say, okay, this data. Okay.
Sorry, I think maybe a clarification. Taylor, you're saying that we as a secure stage are not doing much of that, right? But GitLab as a whole is already doing this.
Correct. We have the mechanisms, the functions that we need to call to do usage ping and to do Snowplow calls, but we as a stage, as Secure, need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that sends the data that we want. So for example, right now, the way that we count jobs and the names of jobs doesn't catch everything, and it isn't the data that we want. You have duplication problems. So we just need to be consistent and then actually go and implement those calls. There is a 1 hour session that was done by the telemetry group or the enablement group that goes through Snowplow and usage ping and talks about how to do those firings, I will find that, because that will be key for this.
Yeah, and then do we know what all metadata about each of these items we want? So like with the first two, is it just counts or is it deeper data? I guess another question I have about telemetry in general, sorry, before, is do we need to provide configuration for folks who want to say, nope, I don't want to send this
The
data?
enablement groups have already done that piece with the opt-outs for usage ping and snowplow. So that is
Okay,
already
so
built into that.
it's already an all or nothing kind of thing that folks
I
can
can't
choose.
remember where it is or how the settings get set, but there is a way for customers to say, nah, I don't want to do that.
Okay.
I know there is an open issue right now about figuring out the scan type and the job data. There's discussions on that issue. In fact, I was just looking at it last night about what data we want to send. And then I believe the vulnerability management team is working on tracking the dismissed interactions with the vulnerabilities, which is also part of first-class vulnerabilities. So it's really like making sure that the two sides of that can be brought together in a Sisense dashboard to track the things that we want.
Is scan duration digging into the actual job run and timing only the scan, or is it the whole job run? Oh, you're defining it. There you go.
Now that we have Docker and Docker out of the way, I believe each one of those jobs now is standalone. So we kind of get that for free if we just do job timing.
What is SMAU?
That's SMAU, that's our stage monthly active user. So
okay.
basically, we have a way to track what features people are using in a particular stage. Each stage is responsible for implementing that. And there are ways to calculate and simplify that down so that, let's say, a single user runs a SAST, DAST, and container scanning job. The data might show that that's 3 usages, but then we have a way to turn that into unique users and say, this person used secure. And we can do that across stages, and through some research that Sid did, basically, the more stages that a customer uses, the more likely they are to upgrade or to purchase. So we want to encourage usage of features across stages.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Do we need to distinguish secrets detection from SAST?
It is a separate feature category.
Oh, we're working on SAST to complete, not okay, yep, sorry, thank you.
Yes. As I'm thinking through this, and since the earlier discussion about code coverage for security scans was deemed as potentially lovable category, that's why I put the question of this lovable and should it be, and for the question for the group, should this be struck from the record for SAST to complete?
As there's no way to do it, I think so. That's my vote.
Go on. What about the mediums across the board?
I think both of those are well defined. Almost all of them are well defined. The only one that I'm not entirely sure is the SMAU. If there's an easy mechanism for calculating that already in the platform or not.
The thing I would say about the SMAU is that if we do the other things, the SMAU piece is very easy. We have a way to do SMAU. It's the what we consider feature usage in secure right now is a complete and total mess. So getting these other pieces clarified and in the form we want, then it's very easy to simplify down SMAL. And actually, I think SMAL, changing that definition would be done by enablement, and really is just about how do we change the SciSense dashboard? What is it looking at? What metrics? How does it calculate it?
And so maybe there's too much, I'm placing too much emphasis on the U, but we can, I think that everything we have here points towards projects, pipelines, usage, not the relationship between users and projects, pipelines. Is that all right in terms of SMAL?
I think so. And my understanding of this is that when you fire a usage ping or a snowplow data call, we get information about users from like a way to then later deduplicate them and normalize them into SMAL.
Going back to line 93, sorry if we kind of covered this already, but what does it mean to be remediated? I mean, as far as what we're tracking, because like someone could have an MR, they could run this security scan, they could see, oh, hey, I've got a problem here, I'll fix it, run another scan, it's gone, send up my MR, and that is never going to get recorded as a vulnerability finding. Is that, I guess, is that a problem?
Where we recognize this is an ideal metric and it's not perfect. I think this is one where once we get standalone vulnerabilities out, we're likely to rethink how we do that type of calculation. But right now it's sort of it's better than nothing.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's a good point too, that like if something changes line numbers right now, that could inflate that number too.
Yeah, so I believe the way that we're tracking the remediated piece from the vulnerability side is if an issue gets created, I believe we're tracking the vulnerabilities with issues associated with them and then watching for that vulnerability to disappear.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Sure. But I mean, some of this is improving it though, right? Because like with standalone vulnerabilities, you can mark it as fixed as well without that issue workflow. So that's another way that it could be, remediated. But I think that kind of answers some of the questions and I had about what exactly we were expecting to track there. So thanks.
In the interest of explicit is better than implicit, going through this and actually putting in notes as far as what the definition of the telemetry items or the metrics are clearly showed where we have composites where they're really the combination of two other distinct atomic units that need to be captured. And so if it's something that is like a failure rate, that is something where we need two other items and the failure rate can be done in Periscope. We don't need that generated for us. In fact, we do a disservice if we try to generate it on a installation by installation purpose. So I've reworked this to get it down to the distinct telemetry items that we would need to be generated, and I'll put that forward to discussion.
I would like to increase the complexity on 100. We really don't have the data, as far as I can tell from the telemetry data, to correlate users to job executions. If we know 10 projects run a SAST node job, would that be the number of users that belong to those projects? Or are they instances?
Right now, I believe it's done by the person that triggered the job. And there are cases where like a job gets triggered, like a scheduled job, and I don't know how we handle that specifically.
Do we mean to say user or customer? Is someone on a free plan considered a customer?
User that is a seat license.
Oh, okay. So we need to be sending that too. Okay.
Not necessarily that we don't need like that they're an ultimate user or things like that. That's built into the telemetry checks already. It's like a user ID type thing.
I think 96 through 99 would have small complexity as well. That's just pulling a count and exposing it.
Sorry. So a seat, would we so like all those on our call here, what is it, like 6 of us? Would that be 6? Or would it be 1 for GitLab? If we use an analyzer.
A licensed seat. So in other words, I would articulate that as Daniel, you as the individual that pushes up a branch that goes through a pipeline that kicks off an analyzer.
Mm-hmm.
You are 1 seat that is using that analyzer. And then if Lucas puts up another branch that goes through that does through a pipeline that then kicks off a job that uses that analyzer, that is a 2nd seat that is using that analyzer. Does that help?
Yeah, each license has a number of seats. Okay, yep, that makes sense now. Thank you.
The way that SMAO is calculated as well has ways that when we get the telemetry ping, it might have your user ID, your association with an account, and we then can do things on the other side where we say, hey, show me unique accounts or show me unique users, so we can count the same usage ping in multiple ways just by the way we slice the data in SciSense. So basically doing like a group by unique user or unique account ID is how we can normalize that. And then if you do it on account ID, you can then pull seat licensing data and do other things like join it with show me all ultimate users or all market segments or things like that.
Thank you, that makes sense.
All right, how are we feeling about these? All right then, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, we've gotten through everything.
All right. So I've got some things to throw out there. And awesome, well done, everyone, by the way. Just a couple things. One, I tried to define effort and complexity. So, you know, when you get a chance to go over to the deck scoring tab, check that out and tell me what you think. And then the other is more for you, Thomas, and that is, do we know how many points the SAST team can take on in a given iteration?
No is a strong word.
Right. Well, and so I'm just thinking guesstimate wise, right?
Okay.
So.
Okay. Assuming that everyone is working in every single milestone and no one is taking time off. So with those big caveats, then the baseline measure or velocity that I'm using on a per engineer basis is that they can achieve 9 points of work in a given iteration. 5 engineers means 45 total points of effort in a given month.
That's a year's worth of work that we've got. Then.
Well, hold on, because this is SAST to complete, and there's other work that we're going to have to do as well, such as community contributions, bugs, updating analyzers, which is not which is just a treadmill we're going to stay on for a while. So I am taking all the way that I was providing earlier today in the staff meeting, that we had a year's worth of work in what we had done already, is that I was taking that 45 points and cutting a third off of it for all that other stuff. So 30 points of work for SAST to complete per month is what I was baselining that estimate off of.
Okay. Okay.
So
Yeah.
assuming,
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, and you know, if I'm just trying to figure it out, because we're gonna have this conversation at some point with PM, as well as you know, my management. And so I just wanted to kind of get a feel, and I was just doing some quick calculations, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, these numbers don't look too good, but but that's all right, right? The whole point is to understand the workload. It's not to say whether we can actually do that in any measure of time. So
yeah. So yeah, and so that goes into what I was saying earlier today, is that we don't have scope locked yet. So I don't know how much of this is going to stay in the SAST to complete bucket.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's absolutely next steps for me, is that now I have a sense of how complex some of these things are, and I may dramatically reduce what I want to accomplish. I think if we look back on this in a year, I have no question that we will not do everything in this list. There will be new things that will be added. There will be things that will be removed, and we will do parts of these things. And so now I think it's a question of how much of each one of these items do we want to do, and in what order. So remember that what we're trying to do is, by the end of the year, when we need to come up for submission for the next Gartner quadrant, what do we want to have done, and how can we be smart and ordering and slicing and dicing to both compete with our competitors, to have our strategic vision fulfilled, and then do all of that in a way that creates something that our customers actually want to use. So this, to me, is the funnest part of product management. I know some of you may not want to do anything related to this, but this is the, how do we take the Rubik's Cube and really make 1 + 1 = 10 and not 2?
Easy. They're extremely large values of 1.
So anyway, like I said, I was just curious. At some point, Thomas, I'm going to need you to put some sort of calculation that you're using, you know, because we have the numbers captured. Now we need the calculation, and so anyway, that's all.
Yeah, and you're needing it discoverable and written down, and where else is going to be. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, and thank you everyone for taking on this experiment. Really appreciate it.
And as you have feedback on how this is working, would very much appreciate hearing it in whatever format you are comfortable giving it. All right.